Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Failing. I'm Associate Director of Library Archives here at the Nebraska State Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's monthly Brown Bag Lecture Series held at the Museum of Nebraska History. It's held on the third Thursday of every month. A detailed schedule for this series, as well as other programs of the Society, can be found at our website, which is www.nebraskahistory.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for funding the filming of these lectures. Their financial support allows us to tape and broadcast these programs on public access television. So look for yourselves there. Next week has been proclaimed as Nebraska Archives Week, which recognizes all of the state's rich archival resources and those people who, as archivists, make archival resources available for Nebraska's citizens today and preserve those archival materials for future generations. To kick off what we anticipate will be an annual recognition of the importance of archives, Shannon White is here today to speak about the Nebraska Memories Project, a project to digitize Nebraska-related historical and cultural materials and make them available via the internet. Shannon received her BA in History and Mass Communications from Auburn University. She holds both an MA in Applied History and a Master's in Library and Information Science from the University of South Carolina. Prior to coming to Nebraska, she was the Assistant Director of the Julia Tutwiler Learning Resources Center at the University of West Alabama. She has been Director of Network Services at the Nebraska Library Commission since June of 2001. So please join me in welcoming Shannon White, who is going to show us many of the great archival resources that the Nebraska Memories Project has to offer.
Thank you for coming today. I appreciate it. As Bunny said, my name is Shannon White, and I work for the Nebraska Library Commission. I'd like to thank Bunny for inviting me here today so I could speak to you all about the Nebraska Memories Project. First, I wanted to talk to you about the project, give you some background on the project, and then we'll actually look at the website and go in and see some of the great archival images that our libraries, historical societies, and museums are making available through this particular project. And I can also answer your questions at any time or after, at the end of the talk if you want to find out how a local historical society or library in your area can participate. I welcome those questions as well. So let's get started. As Bunny said, Nebraska Memories is a cooperative project to digitize Nebraska-related historical and cultural heritage materials and make them available to researchers of all ages via the internet. And the URL for our project is up here on the screen. You can find us at http://www.nebraskamemories.org. Now, the Nebraska Library Commission started this project about 3 years ago, and the point of the project was to enable libraries and societies around the state to do something that they were unable to because of lack of funding and lack of technology in their individual libraries. We visited 275 public libraries back in the year 2001, 2002. That's about how many public libraries there are in the state of Nebraska. And one of the things that a lot of the public library directors and the community members that were invited to those meetings told us is that they were interested in getting their historical materials they held in their institution out to other members of the community, onto a wider audience. And so that's where we started to think about this particular project. So what the commission does is we handle the technology for this project. The database is built using software called Content DM. So we handle the server and everything. Our staff at the Library Commission handle the maintenance of that server. We also provide training to libraries as well as other cultural heritage organization staff on digitization and creating what we call metadata records, which are basically like a catalog record that you would find in your library web catalog, except these records are describing the photographic images or other images that we have available through this database. The Library Commission also provides grant funding for participants, and accredited public libraries can receive grant funding from us to work on projects individually and have their materials put into the database. Historical societies and other cultural heritage organizations can partner with these public libraries to work on collaborative projects to bring their materials they may hold in a historical society into the Nebraska Memories database. And we'll talk about some examples and see some photos from just those type of collaborative projects. So what is included in the Nebraska Memories Project? Well, first of all, primary source materials are the types of things that we're looking for and we're putting into this database that's available on the internet. So we're looking for original Nebraska-related historical and cultural material. So that would be archival material, manuscripts, diaries, personal journals. Also, we have photographic negatives, prints, and we could also accept movie film. The database can also handle moving images. We have sheet materials already in there, such as musical scores, maps, but we also accept posters, drawings, and prints. Sound recordings are also made available through the database, and we'll get to see an example and hear a sound recording that's currently in the database. But we could also handle things such as oral histories. So if a library had an idea to digitize some oral histories that they had in their community, those we could make available through the database, and searchers would be able to listen to the oral history interviews. Yearbooks is one thing that we will also accept into the database, and materials must be owned by the participating institution, and that's one of our caveats right now. We're not accepting materials from the general public. We ask that if library would like to put materials in the database, or a museum or historical society, we'd like them to be the owner and houser of those materials from here on out. So what we're going to do is take a look at the website, and you can see the web address right here, and we'll click onto the website, go out to the internet, and this is exactly what you would see if you were visiting the Nebraska Memories site today. We have a few different options. We have a browse option, an about option, search, and a participants link. So if we click on the about option, we'll be able to read more information, general information about the Nebraska Memories Project. If you wanted to see a list of participants in the project, you could click on the participants link, and you could read through the names of the participants that are currently part of the database, and some more descriptive information about their particular projects or about their grant project that they're working on. And you can see just a few here, such as Keene Memorial Library, High Plains Historical Society, the Historical Society here, Omaha Community Playhouse, some public libraries. You can also search the database in a few different ways. We have a browse search, so if you click on browse, you'll see that you can search a collection by an individual organization name, such as the Antelope County Historical Society. If you clicked on that link, you would bring up all of the associated content that that particular participant has entered into the database. And we also have some browse by topic areas, and these are just topics that we've created because of the content we've received for the database falls into these areas. So as the database grows, and it's currently growing monthly now, we add more materials to it. We may come up with some more topics than the ones that you see here on the screen, but these currently cover a lot of the subject matter that can be found in the database. And we have just over 3,000 items currently available in the database. So what I'd like to do now is talk about some of the participants in the Nebraska Memories Project and look at some of the items that they have digitized and cataloged and made available to researchers of all ages over the internet. One of our first participants was the Poly Music Library, and they're located downtown here within Lincoln City Library downtown branch, the main branch. They were our first participant, and also we call them a guinea pig participant because they allowed us to work with them as we were trying to figure out the software when we first purchased it, and we needed a participant to work with us and kind of work out the kinks about how the process was going to go from a library scanning materials to us uploading it into the database. And they also worked through the training with us so we could find out how best to train other participants down the road in creating the catalog records that would describe each of their images or each of their digitized files that they would put into the database. So the first collection that the Poly Music Library did was called Music of Old Nebraska. And the Poly Music Library holds thousands of pieces of sheet music, and so they received a grant from us to scan pieces of their sheet music collection and make them available through the database. And they also did some sound recordings. Two librarians who worked at Poly Music Library, Carolyn Dow and Linda Helfman, are actually musicians as well. So they took some of the sheet music and recorded that in a sound studio and created a digital file of that, which we were able to upload into the Nebraska Memories database. So you can search on the music, you'd be able to see a piece of the sheet music, and then you could also click a link and it would allow you to listen to that piece of music being played. So let's do a search now for an item from the Poly collection. And you can see on our search screen here, the first one we'll take a look at is a piece of sheet music called By the Waters of Minnetonka. And it'll take a little second for this to come up, but we'll be able to see the cover of the sheet music, and then we'll be able to click in and also see the score. So as we can see here on the screen, this is just the cover of that particular piece of music. And if I move over, I can click on score, and we'll be able to see the digitized file of this particular piece of music come up on the screen. So a musician could print this out, use this in their own home performance, or if they were going to do a concert for someone, the sheet music that they would be able to print out from here is of high enough quality that they would be able to read all of the notes, every little piece of the music that they need to see. The resolution will be high enough for them to do that. So here we see the score from the Waters of Minnetonka. So if we do that search again, we'll also see a list of results. And the second item on that list is the audio version of this particular piece of music. And we'll see there's a description about the piece of music. This is a solo piece performed by Linda Marsh Helfman. It was a best-selling sheet music number of its day. And if we click on the words play or view item, we'll be able to hear this particular piece of music played as it was recorded a couple years ago when Linda played it. It'll take a few seconds for this to download, and this can play in a QuickTime player or real player format that you likely have on your home computer or a library computer already. So you can listen to that entire song. The recording is about 2 minutes and 36 seconds, I believe. So you would be able to listen to that anytime or download that and listen to it as you wish. Another collection that the Poly Music Library is working on is the collection from Lillian Helms Poly. She was the benefactor of the Poly Music Library there. And they have a collection of her personal materials that include a lot of photographs as well as musical scores that she had and programs from musical events that she attended here in Lincoln and elsewhere. And so it's a really nice collection to see. You can see photographs of her as a baby all through her life, as well as tons of programs from musicians that came to Lincoln and performed over the years. So let's do a search for Lillian Helms Poly. And we can see we have about 93 items that match that particular search. And I'm just going to move to the second page here. So Lillian Helms Poly, she was a singer, a teacher, music appreciator. She was an amateur actress and also a benefactor. And one of the first photos I'll bring up is Lillian as an infant. So there we can see Lillian as a small child. And if we move back, we can see Lillian shortly after her marriage in 1902. And you can read some descriptive information that goes along with each of the images in the collection here. And then we can see Lillian in her later years with some associates here in Lincoln. This was taken in 1914. And you'll see in the description some of the other members of her group are noted along with her here. So there's quite a bit of information for Lillian Hilms in here. She was also a performer, so we could see her in a colonial costume where she did a lot of performances. So quite a bit of interesting information. Now, another one of our participants is a collaborative project that received a grant from the Library Commission. It was the McCook Public Library, and they had a collaborative project with the High Plains Historical Society and Museum that's also located in McCook. So the public library was awarded an LSTA grant in 2005 to work in partnership with their local museum, and they were digitizing photographs that documented railroad history in western Nebraska. So they have about 70 images now available in the Nebraska Memories database that include growth of the CB and Q Railroad in McCook, Nebraska, and the surrounding area from the 1880s through the 1960s. So we'll take a look at one of the items that's available in that particular collection. And this is actually a photograph of the Liberty Bell. And apparently the Liberty Bell used to travel across the country by train, and make stops, and people would come out and see the Liberty Bell until they figured it was a little too fragile to do this. And I believe they stopped doing this in the 1930s. So you can see there are some flags flanked here in the Liberty Bell along the train as it's making its trip. And it stopped in McCook, it says in July of 1909. So another one of our largest collections is actually from the Nebraska Memorial Library in David City, and they have a collection of studio photographs from the Boston studio. And you may be familiar with the Boston Studio collection. They were featured on the NET Saving Nebraska's Treasures television show that aired earlier in the year. And the Boston Studio collection actually consists of over 68,000 negatives that record the daily life of community members in David City, Nebraska from 1893 to up to 1979. So the negatives are available now for digitization, and they also have ledgers that accompany each of those negatives. So as the photographer took the pictures, they would record who was the subject of that particular photograph and often what they were wearing or some other information about that particular person. And that has allowed this volunteer-led project to create wonderful metadata records that describe each of the photographs that are in the collection, because they had so much information available through those ledgers. So the Nebraska Memorial Library was awarded a grant to do a collaborative project with the Boston studio in 2004. They digitized just over 1,000 of these negatives, and they created the metadata records that describe each of those, and we imported those into the database, and those are available for searching in the Nebraska Memories database today. So the 68,000 images were part of the Boston Studio collection, and Harvey Boston, who started the studio, was a photographer in David City from 1893 until 1927. So he opened his portrait studio. It was later run by his daughter Edith, and then by his son-in-law before it was sold to John and Fred McVeigh in 1973, and they continued the business on until 1979. So I wanted to pull up some images from this particular studio, and I thought this was an interesting one. As the volunteers scanned the images, and they worked on creating the catalog or metadata records that describe each of these images, our cataloging staff at the commission also would work on this as well. And they thought this was a little interesting. There's a group of photos here of Clyde, I believe you may call that Zeilinger, Z-E-I-L-I-N-G-E-R. And there's also some photos of his sister, Maud. So we see Maud here. She was born in 1891, sister of Clyde. And there are a couple of images of Maud. And then if you look at the pictures of Clyde, you could also check census records and find out what these particular people were doing throughout their lives. And so we did a little research, and we found out in 1910, Clyde was a farmhand at the age of 18. And then in 1920, the census indicated that Clyde was a soldier in Illinois at Camp Grant. But in 1930, he was found to be a prisoner at Fort Sam Houston prison in Texas. So Clyde must have been an interesting character. And some community members that worked with the volunteers in David City, one local woman said that she did know Clyde and wasn't particularly fond of him. And I'm not sure how long he was a prisoner at Fort Sam Houston, but there's quite a bit of history behind all of these pictures that not only you can find from the metadata that's associated with these, but you can also do your own historical research behind that and find out even more. So another nice little picture that we can see from the David City Boston Studio Collection is this one of the sisters Phyllis and Ava Bach. And we received a comment through our web comment form on the Nebraska Memories site that provided us with more information about this particular photo. And Patty Smith wrote to us and wanted us to know that the girl that was standing here in this photo was her Aunt Phyllis Bach Sumter, who was born in 1917 and had just passed away this past year, 2006. She told us that the little girl that was sitting was her mother, Ava Bach Sokol, who was born in 1918, and she knew a story behind the picture. She'd heard that this was a very difficult picture for the photographer to take because her aunt kept trying to take the book away from her mother. And she enjoyed looking at the picture so much she didn't want her younger cousin to have access to that book. But she complimented our site, and we were thankful to get more information about this particular photo, which we were able to enhance our record description as well when we receive information from the public like that. So let's take another look. This is an interesting story. You can tell there was a photographer at the hospital when this particular baby was born. This is Nancy Lawn, who was premature. And there's actually a happy ending to this story, even though the picture seems very sad to begin with. She was born on March 4th in 1939, 2 pounds and 6 ounces and only 15 inches long. And we can see a picture of the incubator that Nancy was in the hospital. We can see her there through the little window. But a few years later, we can see a picture of Nancy. She's the smaller. And this is her sister, Belva Joy. And this was taken in May of 1942. So she grew up to be a healthy girl. So it was a happy ending to that story. But those are quite interesting photos taken by a studio photographer there in the hospital. And they just happened to document something that could have been a sad story, but it turned out to be quite a happy one. Now we'll take a look at another picture. As the volunteers for the Boston Studio Project were working on the descriptive metadata records to accompany their scanned photographs, they did not always have as much information as was needed to create the record. And so sometimes they would go out and do some research on their own. And this was a particular photo that did not have much information on. Sister Mary Irma. And so they happened to write the Notre Dame Sisterhood asking for more information about this particular photograph because they really liked the photograph and wanted to add it to the collection. And they heard back from the Sisterhood at Notre Dame, and they sent some information about Mary Irma. And she was born in North Dakota, not in North Dakota, she was born on October 25th, 1901 in Bohemia. And she came to America with her parents in 1906. And she was a Notre Dame sister for 60 years and spent her religious life as a cook. And she also worked at the Holy Trinity School in Brainerd and at Dwight Assumption in the 1930s. And in 1943, she became a U.S. citizen. And she lived until the age of 82 and died in 1984. So that information was what they researched on their own so they could create a nice descriptive record to go along with this particular photograph. So folks that now search the Nebraska Memories database have a much more robust record and more descriptive information about this particular image. And some of the subjects of the photographs we can sort of see as they progress through life. So this particular picture is of John Eberly, who lived in David City. He was born in 1888, and here he is in his three-piece suit. He was 21 years old when this particular photograph was taken. And here we see him with his new wife. I believe her name is Aileen. This was taken the following year. And here we see him 40 years later, obviously a pillar of the community at age 63 with some other members or friends here in the community. His wife is not in this particular photo, so I'm not sure if she had passed away by that time or if she just wasn't in this particular photograph. But it's really interesting to document someone's life and be able to see them, at an early age and maybe when they're married. And sometimes we have pictures of children that are documented through the Nebraska Memories Project up until their senior years. Now, this particular subject was a resident of David City. This is Dr. Muriel Anderson, and she was a osteopathic doctor, and she was actually blind. But she retired from her practice in 1971, and that was a practice that was begun in 1924. And she lived in David City for over 50 years practicing medicine. This particular photo is of Amelia Shirk. And Amelia was actually a survivor of the children's blizzard of 1888. She was born in 1875. Her parents were Oliver and Martha Shirk of Octavia, Nebraska. And her father was a minister at the Brethren Church there in Octavia. When her father became ill, the family moved to Iowa to be near her grandparents. And then after her father died, Martha and Amelia returned to Butler County so they could live near her mother's sisters and brothers. Several years later, Martha met and married James Gibson, and they moved to Holt County, where they farmed. And it was in Holt County that Amelia spent the night in a snowdrift in that blizzard in 1888. She and a companion were riding home from school on horseback when they were caught, and searchers found her and her companion. They were okay, but the horse had frozen to death. Amelia's hands and feet were also frozen, but as you can see from this photograph, she survived that terrible night. She later moved to Missouri, where she raised 4 boys and another daughter, and her stepfather died in a drowning accident, and then they moved back to Octavia. So she had quite an interesting history behind her, and she actually turned out to be a dressmaker, and she was known as Aunt Millie, and her skills as a dressmaker were highly sought out there in Butler County. She was called Aunt Millie, and her half-sister Ethel also lived there with her, and then eventually, later in life, she made her home in Columbus, Nebraska, before she died in 1978. So quite a bit of information can be found about Amelia. Obviously a woman who lived through quite a traumatic event and turned out to have a really nice life, and apparently was, many a bride wanted Aunt Millie to make their dress for her. Now, another project that we have that's part of the Nebraska Memories database is a collaborative project that we've done. We've done this project a couple of times with students from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. The University of Nebraska at Omaha has a collaborative program with University of Missouri in library science. So students are able to take some classes from Missouri, distance learning classes, and then also take some in-person classes from faculty at UNO, and they end up graduating with a master's degree in library science. So in some of the classes, we've been working with them to train them how to do scanning and create catalog records for digital pieces that can go into the Nebraska Memories project. And the latest one that we did was a partnership with Omaha Community Playhouse. And so what we do is we search for an institution that is interested in getting their materials into the database, Nebraska Memories database, but may not have the staff time or expertise or the funding to do that on their own. So we, in turn, go to the class, talk to the students about digitization, work on some training with them, and tell them how they can help that institution create the catalog records. So the last partnership was the Omaha Community Playhouse, and it was a catalog class that did this. And they created a number of scans of images that the Community Playhouse holds. And we'll take a look at some of these. They're quite interesting. So you may have heard of Henry Fonda or Dorothy McGuire. There's some there are some photos here of both Henry Fonda and Dorothy McGuire that were scanned by this particular class. Here's one. This is a black and white photograph of Henry Fonda and Dorothy in the Playhouse's production of A Kiss for Cinderella. So Henry Fonda is 25 years old in this particular picture, and he's the one in the policeman's uniform, and Dorothy's there in the center, and she was 13 years old at the time, 1930, when this photo was taken. And here we have another photo. This one was taken in 1955, and you can see Dorothy on the end here. And this is a production, this was the actors and actresses talking about a production called The Country Girl that the Community Playhouse put on that year, 1955. We can also search for some other well-known Nebraskans. This is a search I'm doing for John Beasley. He was born in 1943 and lived in Omaha. He was actually a railroad worker in the early part of his life before he became an actor, and he gained prominence for his role as Reverend C. Charles Blackwell in Robert Duvall's film The Apostle. And you can see John Beasley here seated in the center. And this is a scene from, this is Tom Robinson's trial in the play To Kill a Mockingbird that the Community Playhouse put on in 1978. So another collection that we have available through the Nebraska Memories Project, and I believe this is probably our second largest collection. This is from the Nebraska State Historical Society. And we have almost 500 images from the John Nelson collection. And we'll take a look at some of these images. And if we want to pull up images just from a particular institution, I could just click on that institution's name. And we'll see we have quite a number here. And these are from the John Nelson collection. I always thought this was a cute one. These are John Nelson's nieces, Alice and Mildred, outside with two of their kittens and probably a little bowl of milk there. And this was a photograph that John Nelson had taken. So along with each of these photographs, you can see there's a title listed. This one is Alice Nelson and Mildred Nelson outside with two kittens. And there's a description that goes along with each of the photographs that we've been looking at. It tells, sometimes it tells the size of the photograph, if it was a slide negative or if it was a black and white photograph. This was a black and white photograph. It was actually on a postcard, so that's indicated here in the description. Then what other information you can glean from the photograph, or that may have been in a ledger, or that the cataloger can figure out or researcher can find out about that particular photograph, they indicate here in the description. A creator is listed, and in this case, that's the photographer, John Nelson, and we have his date of birth as 1864 and his date of death listed there as 1942. The owner and publisher of this is the Nebraska State Historical Society, and they're listed here. And next we have, usually along with every photograph, we try to have a date. We don't always know an exact date of when that photograph was taken, but we may have a range of dates, or we may have a circa date listed in the descriptive record for each of the photographs that you see in the database. So this one was taken around 1909 to 1912. And then we list some subjects. So if you're doing a search and you happen to do a search in the database for cats, you would find this picture along with other pictures that may have cats, or girls, or photographic postcards. So we assign subject headings for each of the photographs in there, and they contain terms that you as a user of the database may be using when you're doing a search. And then we list the owning institution, which is the Nebraska State Historical Society. And then below that, we have a link to what we call a rights management statement. And this is different for each one of our participants. And this lists the type of information that they would require you to use if you wanted to use some of these photos as a subject in a talk or a report you were doing. Or it also would give information if you wanted copies of photographs, how you could obtain a copy of that. And so it may indicate that you need to contact that historical society directly, as in this case. Sometimes a link for a particular library may be listed here, and it may go off to more information about that individual collection and the particular library's requirements as a participant. So what we've been trying to do is work with libraries and museums over the past few years. We've offered quite a few number of training sessions on digitization so we can teach staff how to scan materials, how to use the scanner and the software that they need to create a digitized file of a photograph or perhaps a piece of text or sheet music. And then we would also have our cataloger train them on how to create those metadata records. And that would be the description that would go along with each of the photographs or the digitized file that would be part of the Nebraska Memories project. And things have to be in a certain order, and you have to get your descriptions just perfect in a certain way so that the database doesn't bump them out. But we work with the libraries on doing that. We also have a scanning center that's available, so if you're a member of a historical society or a volunteer or a staff member of an institution like that, you can also come to the Library Commission and use the scanning center we have so you don't have to purchase your own equipment. We also offer to create scans of small collections up to, say, about 50 items for an institution if you don't have funds to do that yet or don't have a way to use our scanning center at this time. And that's the offer we make just so an institution can get their feet wet and begin to learn about digitization and how then they could further educate themselves and perhaps do a project on their own. If you get your feet wet and you kind of get a handle on the scanning process, then you may feel more comfortable if your institution wanted to actually write a grant to obtain some extra funding to do a larger project on your own. So those are things that we're working with different types of cultural heritage institutions. And like I said, we work with libraries, historical societies, museums, any type of institution in Nebraska that may have materials that fit the scope of Nebraska historical or cultural materials that would fit into the database here. We invite those types of institutions to contact us, to talk to us about a particular project, or if you're a community member and know that your local historical society or library has materials that you'd like to see put up so that more people around the world can access those images rather than just the folks that visit your particular community, that's something that we would love to talk to your institution about. So as the year goes on, we'll be working with more libraries and museums. We'll be adding more digitized files to our Nebraska Memories database. We'll probably have, we have more collections that are being currently worked on, but the institutions that are listed here are the ones that actually have material in the database at this time. So if you'd like to visit the Nebraska Memories database and do some searching on your own, you may have a family name you'd like to search on or a particular event that we may have a photograph of here in the database. We have a lot of pictures of community events, communities, buildings, different historical events that happened across the state. Also images from Wayne State College is another of our participants, so you may have some interest in that if you're an alum of that particular institution. Feel free to visit the website, do some searches. Also use the comment box to give us some feedback. We have a survey available there that you can tell us what you would like to see in the database, so we can go to libraries and say, this is what we're hearing. Our users are saying they want to see in the database. These are the types of materials people would like to have access to. Perhaps you have some of these materials, and we can work with you to scan those and digitize and describe them to make them part of the collection here that's on the World Wide Web. So do you have any questions this afternoon about the database? Okay.
Get the ball rolling. Do you have any moving images?
We do not have, Bunny asked if we had any moving images currently in the collection. The software that we use, Content DM, can handle moving images, like we listen to the sound recording, but currently we don't have any moving images, though we would be happy to add moving images to the collection. I know the Historical Society has moving images. That would be one source, but there may also be other institutions around the state that have old movie clips or old film clips. Perhaps someone filmed an historical event or a prominent figure in town making a speech at one time or something like that. We could take that, digitize that from whatever format it's currently in, and we could put that in the database so you would be able to search for it under different terms and keywords and subject keywords, and then you would be able to view that as a user of the Nebraska Memories database online and see that moving image. So that's definitely something that we'd like to see more of here in the database as well. You have other questions? Yes?
All the famous photograph collections that you have, are those available on the internet also? For example, like the picture photographs?
No, the Historical Society holds many of the Butcher Solomon photographs. We do not have any currently as part of this project. Currently, the only project we have from the Historical Society available through Nebraska Memories is that John Nelson collection. But they may have something.
Collection is available online through the American Memory website, the Library of Congress website. So most if not all the Butcher collection is available online.
Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that we also look at when we're talking to an institution about doing a digitization project, is we want to ensure that someone else hasn't digitized those and already made them available online. So those are available through the American Memory Project, the Library of Congress. Do you have another, any other questions about the Nebraska Memories Project? Yes?
Is it just a practical matter that you aren't taking
Personal?
from individuals?
Okay, yeah, the question was, is it a practical matter that we're not taking privately held images and photographs and other historical materials? At this time, yeah, it is basically a matter of practicality. We don't, at the Nebraska Library Commission, we don't really have the staff that would be able to determine, you know, which would be the best of those things held privately to put in the Nebraska Memories collection. We don't have a staff of curators at the Library Commission that would be able to go out and say, you know, of everybody that wants their grandmother in the project, you know, maybe what sampling would be the best one. There are some other projects out there that are beginning to do some digitization of privately held collections, but it's just a few more steps in the process and that we haven't been able to get to yet, because when you open that door, that's sort of like a floodgate. When you open that up, you know, everybody wants their stuff in the Nebraska Memories Project, which is a great thing, but at this point, we're just not able to handle that. And that may be something that we change later when we have a better grasp of the software, have some more things in the database, and have worked with more libraries. So that isn't necessarily something that's always going to stay that way, but at this time, we're just not able to provide the expertise to determine whose privately held materials would probably be best to spend the time on to digitize and put into the collection. Yes?
There's a cost, commenting on the last question, there's a cost that's involved. Also, it's quite expensive. A lot of people don't realize it. Have you ever had any, my question is, have you ever had any contact with the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society in Omaha?
The question was, have we had contact with the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society in Omaha? Not that I know of. We do some training sessions, and usually we try to keep in contact with participants in our training sessions to see if they have projects. That is not one that I think that we've had contact with yet, but I'll note that. And if they have some collections.
They have a very large collection.
Really? Okay. That would be good to know.
I'm on the board.
Okay.
And for 10 years. One of our first exhibits was Father Flanagan.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, he founded Boys Town, but he needed financing, and his financing came from a Jewish man in Omaha.
So have any of those items been digitized yet, or they're
I don't know if they've done any of that.
okay? Yeah, that would, especially interested in Omaha collections because the students can work on those too.
Community center, which is a very large community center in Omaha. We have quite a bit of the basement for our archives, so we've got a lot.
Okay, great collection. Well, that sounds great. Yes, I'll make note of that and try to contact somebody there. Because we do have a scanning center available, we invite use of that by institutions if they would like to use the equipment that we have so they don't have to go out and purchase their own, especially if they're just learning about it and don't want to expend funds to keep something permanently like that. They can use our scanning center to do digitization, or we can help them out with that and do some small projects together for them just to get them in the database. The database is also searchable through the web. So if you do some Google searches, you will be able to find images from the database. And later, as the year goes on, we'll have these records available in a database called WorldCat, which is a database that holds thousands of items from libraries all over the world. So there will be many ways that users, even if they don't know about the particular website, Nebraska Memories, if they're doing general web searches in general search engines like Google or Yahoo, they'll be able to come into the Nebraska Memories database and find what they were looking for that way without having to know, oh, I know about the Nebraska Memories project. And so hopefully, and I'm sure we've had users from all over, and we get comments from all over as well, as we've talked about some of the comments we've received from people that help us identify. We've also received comments telling us that identification is incorrect, which we can then go and correct in our records too. So anything like that that we can do to enhance our descriptive records is really helpful. So we always want to hear from the public about that. Have other questions about the project or anything involved? If not, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming this afternoon to listen to me talk about the Nebraska Memories Project. I hope you'll take a look at it on the web. You'll see the web address up here. It's www.nebraskamemories.org. It's always available 24/7. There's also a comment form and a survey that you can send us with some just feedback about what you think about the search and everything that you see in the database. And we invite you to tell us anything that you like so that we can make improvements for you as well. And if you do know of an institution, like you mentioned, the center in Omaha, if you do know of other institutions around the state that have materials that you'd like to push along to get a project started, or that you think are ready to start a project, we'd love to hear from you about those particular institutions too, so we can contact them and try to get their materials in the database and make them available to users all around the world. Thank you very much.